Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a podcast that really kind of blew my mind a little bit. It's called Code and Conscience: The Dawn of the AI Revolution.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I listened to that one too. That was pretty intense.
It is. It's intense, but it's also like super fascinating.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in AI, but this podcast really digs into both the amazing potential and like the ethical questions, which honestly kind of freaked me out a bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think what I found really interesting about Code and Conscience is how it uses this historical lens, right, to like trace the evolution of AI all the way back to the very idea of machines, that could think.
Right. And the narrator, Dr. Lee Levas, she's like this brilliant AI ethicist.
Yeah.
And she starts off by asking this question: can machines think?
Hmm.
I mean, it's a question people have been asking for centuries. But the podcast, it's cool how it jumps from, those ancient automatons all the way to today's smart cities.
It does. It does. It really makes you think about how far we've come, but also like where are we going?
Exactly. Like, what's next? It's a little unnerving.
It is, yeah, and it goes back, it traces those ideas from people like Ada Lovelace way back in the 1800s,
Why?
who imagined computers as doing more than just like calculations.
Right.
And then Alan Turing in the 1950s, who really kind of laid the groundwork for what we call AI today. So it's really cool how they go through that whole history.
Yeah, and there's that whole thing about chess playing computers, right?
Yeah.
Like Deep Blue beating Kasparov. I remember watching that on TV. Like, it was a huge EE deal.
Oh, yeah.
But the podcast, it actually explains why that was so significant for AI.
Right, because it wasn't just about a computer crunching numbers faster than a human. What Deep Blue's victory showed was machine learning. Like, the computer analyzed massive data sets of chess games, and it learned how to adapt its strategies based on what it was seeing. And that was a big deal because it showed that machines could learn from data and improve their performance, which is, a core principle of AI today.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about processing power, it's about the ability to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But is that the same as understanding? Does it mean that machines understand what they're doing? Dr. Voss seems to say that true understanding is where that line gets blurry, between artificial and human intelligence.
That's exactly right. And that kind of leads into what the podcast calls the double-edged sword of AI.
Yeah, Act 2 of Code and Conscience really hits you with that contrast. On the one hand, you have AI being used to diagnose diseases earlier and even develop new treatments, right? Potentially saving so many lives. But then on the other hand, you have things like facial recognition being used for surveillance and control, which is honestly kind of scary.
Absolutely. It really highlights, the ethical dilemma at the heart of all this AI revolution. The same technology can be used for good or for bad.
Right. And there's this one part in the podcast that uses this image of neural networks, like trapping humans inside this labyrinth. And it's like a metaphor, right? For how we're relying on systems we don't even fully understand. I have to admit that image kind of stuck with me.
It's a powerful image. And a neural network, basically, you can think of it as like a complex web of interconnected algorithms.
Okay.
That are designed to kind of mimic the way a human brain works. But the problem is that as these networks get more and more complex, they also become more opaque. Even the people who design them don't always understand, how they're arriving at their decisions.
So if we're outsourcing critical decisions to AI systems, right? Like healthcare or self-driving cars.
Yeah.
And we don't even fully understand how they work. That's a pretty big problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it raises the question of accountability. Who's responsible when AI goes wrong? If a self-driving car makes a mistake and causes an accident, you know who's to blame. The programmer, the company that built the car, the person who was in the car.
I mean, these are huge questions we're going to have to deal with as AI becomes more and more part of our lives. And it's not just about assigning blame. It's about figuring out those ethical guidelines, those safeguards to make sure AI is being used responsibly. It's all honestly kind of overwhelming.
It is. And that's just the first half of the podcast. Wait till we get into Act 3 where they start talking about AI consciousness.
Okay, yeah, Act 3 gets seriously trippy.
Yeah.
They're asking questions like, can AI be truly creative? Can it have empathy? Can it even deceive? It's like, whoa.
Right. It really blurs the lines between science fiction and reality. There's this anecdote they share about an OpenAI engineer who starts to wonder if AI is actually becoming aware, not just mimicking human behavior.
Okay, now that is creepy. But what happens if AI becomes self-aware? That's some straight up sci-fi movie stuff.
It is, and it raises those big questions about what is consciousness? What does it mean to be human? It's not just a technological question, it's philosophical.
And that's what makes Code and Conscience so interesting, right? It's not just about the cool tech. It's about the bigger questions that AI raises about who we are and where we're headed as a species.
Exactly. And the podcast, it really digs into both the potential benefits and risks of AI in a way that makes you think. It's definitely not your typical tech podcast.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from the history of AI to the ethical dilemmas it raises. But it doesn't stop there, right? Like, the podcast also explores what we can actually do about all of this.
You got it. In the final act, Code and Conscience takes us to what Dr. Voss calls the crossroads. Like, we're at this critical moment where we have to make some choices about the future of AI. And they start Act 4 with this, like, really powerful montage of images like protests and congressional hearings and kids, learning to code. And it just drives home the point that we're at this, like, turning point right now. Like, the choices we make now about AI will have huge consequences for the future.
Yeah, that is a lot of pressure. But it also feels kind of empowering in a way. Like, it's not like we're just passive bystanders in all of this,
Right.
We can actually do something about it.
Exactly. And that's what Dr. Voss really emphasizes throughout the podcast. We have agency. We're not just at the mercy of technology. We can shape how it's developed and used.
Okay, but how do we do that? I mean, AI is so complex.
Right.
It feels like something that only, like, scientists and engineers really understand,
Well, that's part of the problem, right? The podcast is saying that we can't leave it just to the tech experts to figure this out.
Right.
We need a much broader conversation about AI,
Yeah.
involving everyone from philosophers and ethicists to policymakers and everyday citizens.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, AI is going to impact, like, pretty much every aspect of our lives.
Right.
So it's not just a technical issue, it's a human issue.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of conscience comes in. It's not enough to just write the code. We need to use it with ethical consideration. We need to think about the values we want to embed in the systems.
Okay, so it's like we need to cope with conscience.
Yeah.
That's pretty catchy. But it's more than just a slogan.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It means actually thinking through, like, the potential consequences of the technology.
It does. It's about being proactive, not reactive. It's about thinking about those potential risks and benefits of AI and figuring out those safeguards to ensure it's used for good. And that's what makes it all different. How do you define good when it comes to something so complex?
Like, use value to recognize that AI is, like, all good, not just a select few.
Those are the big questions that we need to be thinking about. The podcast doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it does offer some
I was actually really inspired by something. Like, that project is using AI to restore has this potential for incredible good and incredible harm. But the key takeaway here is that we have a choice in how we develop and deploy this technology.
Yeah, we're not just passive observers, we're active participants.
Right.
We have the power to shape the future of AI, and that's both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
I think you hit the nail on the head. The podcast really captures that duality.
The awe and the anxiety, the hope and the fear. It's not a simple story, and I think that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah, for sure. So where do you stand on this whole AI revolution thing? After listening to Code and Conscience, are you optimistic? Pessimistic?
It's tough to say, honestly.
Yeah.
I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I believe that AI has the potential to be a force for good in the world.
Right.
But I also recognize the very real risks and challenges.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's like we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend this isn't happening.
Yeah.
We need to be informed and engaged and actively involved in shaping this future.
I agree with you 100%. And I think that's the message of Code and Conscience. It's a call to action.
You're right.
It's saying, hey, we're all stakeholders in this.
Yeah.
And we all have a role to play.
So what can we actually do besides listen to this podcast?
Yeah.
Which everyone should definitely
Well,
do.
for starters, I think we can educate ourselves.
Yeah.
about AI, how it works, its potential benefits and risks,
Yeah.
the ethical considerations around its development and use.
Right? Knowledge is power. The more we understand about AI, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions about it, you know.
Exactly. We can also engage in conversations about AI with our friends, family, colleagues, elected officials.
Yeah.
You know, we need to make this a topic of public discourse, not just something that's discussed in tech circles.
I think that's a really important point. Like, the more we talk about it, the more we can kind of demystify it and bring it into the realm of everyday conversation.
Right, and that can lead to more informed policy decisions, more responsible development practices, and a more equitable distribution of the benefits of AI.
So it's like we need to democratize the conversation about AI, just like the podcast says, we need to democratize AI itself.
Exactly, and that's not just a technological challenge,
Yeah.
it's a social and political one. We need to make sure that everyone has a voice in shaping the future of AI, regardless of their background or expertise.
Okay, so we need to educate ourselves, engage in conversations, and advocate for more inclusive and equitable approaches to AI development. That's a good starting
It is.
But it still feels kind of daunting. You know, like, what can one person really do to make a difference in all of this?
I hear you. It can feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
But remember, every movement starts with individuals taking action.
Right?
Our collective choices, big and small, will shape the future of AI.
That's a good reminder. It's not about waiting for someone else to fix it. It's about each of us doing what we can, however small it may seem.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe our small actions will inspire others to take action.
Right.
And those actions will ripple outward and create a wave of change.
I like that image, a ripple effect of positive change. That makes me feel like we can actually make a difference. But we're not done with the podcast yet, are we?
Not quite.
There's still more to unpack in this final act. So we talked about all the benefits and the risks of AI, right? And how we need to have this bigger conversation about it as a society. But in the final act of Code and Conscience, Dr. Voss really pushes us to think about, like, what kind of future we want to create with all of this.
Yeah, it's like she's saying, okay, we've looked at the situation, now it's time to make some choices.
Exactly. The choices we make now are going to determine, whether AI empowers us or enslaves us, whether it amplifies our biases or helps us overcome them, whether it, like, concentrates power or democratizes it.
It really comes down to that question that she keeps coming back to. Will AI concentrate power, or will we democratize it for everyone?
That's a big question. But the podcast does offer some hope too, right? Like all those examples of how AI is being used to make things better.
Definitely. There's so many inspiring stories in this last act. It's like a counterbalance to all the doom and gloom, It's like, hey, AI can be a powerful tool for good if we use it the right way.
Right. Like that project using AI to help paralyzed people walk again.
Yeah.
That's like straight out of science fiction. It's crazy.
It is, and it shows how AI can really make a difference in people's lives. It's not just about convenience, it's about, like, pushing those boundaries,
Yeah. And what about using AI to predict climate disasters? That could be a game changer for the planet.
Absolutely. AI could be huge in helping us find solutions to our environmental problems, from renewable energy to managing our resources better.
It really is amazing to think about all the good it could do. But I keep coming back to that question of control. How do we make sure AI is used for good?
That's the million-dollar question. There's no easy answer. But I think Dr. Voss makes a good point that we need to include ethical considerations in every step of the way, from how we design the algorithms to what data we use to train them.
So it's not just writing code, it's writing code with a conscience.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
have to think about what values we're putting into these systems and make sure they line up with our human values.
Whose values are we talking about? That's the hard part, right? Different people have different values.
That's true. And that's why this needs to be a global conversation. We need everyone's perspective to make sure everyone has a voice in this.
It's almost like we need like a global AI ethics council or something.
That's an interesting idea. Maybe something like that will happen as AI becomes more and more a part of our lives. We definitely need some way to make sure it's used responsibly.
Yeah, it can't just be governments and corporations making all the decisions. We all need to take responsibility too, right?
Absolutely. Every time you click on something, buy something, or interact with AI, you're helping shape it. We all need to be informed and make good choices.
So it's both the big decisions and the little everyday choices.
Exactly. It's not something that's happening to us, it's something we're all creating together.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. So we're not powerless. We can actually shape this future.
We can and we have to. The stakes are just too high to ignore it.
I feel like I have a whole new sense of urgency after listening to Code and Conscience. Like a wake-up call, a challenge. It's telling us, hey, be a part of this.
It is. And it's not just about talk, it's about doing something. It's about educating ourselves, talking to people, speaking up for change, and making conscious choices every day.
So what's your big takeaway from all of this? What message do you want to leave our listeners with?
The AI revolution is already here, and it's up to all of us to decide what kind of future we want with it. So let's choose wisely.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Code and Conscience, the dawn of the AI revolution. It's one of those podcasts that sticks with you, and hopefully it'll get you thinking and doing something about this. Be sure to check it out and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.